those of us who are Christians, we don't believe that you can have a theory of God based on color.
When I look at Joseph H. Jackson, he argued that to the extent that the white man doesn't give you a job, it's incumbent upon you to build your own businesses and to hire your brother and your sister and your neighbor, that you aren't begging someone else for a job. And so he didn't only talk about this, but he exemplified this. There were a bunch of sharecroppers in the South who were getting cheated. Jackson was the president of the National Baptist Convention. The convention bought 400 acres of farmland in the South. They allowed these black sharecroppers to work the land for free. And to the extent that they raised money for their crops, they got to keep and pocket that money so long as they were saving that money to buy their own farmland. So they can move from sharecroppers to farmers and not have to depend on anybody else for their daily bread. The convention, under the behest of Jackson, did many of these things. Now, the reason why I bring up Jackson in comparison to Martin Luther King is because, as you know, Ebenezer Baptist Church was under the umbrella of the National Baptist Convention. Martin Luther King, fresh out of Crozer, very young, very ambitious, wanted to move the National Baptist Convention into a new, more radical, if I can use that word, social gospel, and to get away from the kind of fundamental gospel that Joseph H. Jackson and his ilk was preaching. He wanted to be the president of the National Baptist Convention. He was overwhelmingly rejected, and it got pretty contentious. Someone was pushed off a stage and died. Someone from Martin Luther King's little ilk pushed this young man off the stage and he died. So it got pretty contentious, and they ended up kicking Martin Luther King and his friends out of the National Baptist Convention. This was before his face was plastered on Time magazine and all the rest of it. So what they decided to do, at the suggestion of Stanley Levison, was start a new Baptist convention which would rival the National Baptist Convention. So they started the Progressive National Baptist Convention. Of course, it didn't take off. It didn't do anything. So they started this Southern Leadership Conference, and then they moved from there to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was the result of the fact that Martin Luther King and his campaign was not popular to these Negroes in the South as much as Joseph H. Jackson, who was a continuation of the kinds of things that Booker T. Washington talked about. The advantage that Martin Luther King and his ilk had that Joseph H. Jackson did not have is that the media basically swarmed around Martin Luther King. They made him larger than life. Stanley Levison, who was a phenomenal publicist, he's the one who lined up the interviews, who was able to mobilize the media to put cameras in front of the civil rights movement under the behest of Martin Luther King, and the rest is history.